Thank you. I am thrilled to be here. There's a shout out to this bookstore on page 238 of the book, and that's because during the lockdown, when I had a book released called Convince Me in 2020, I did a virtual event here, which was a good event. And I was then just conceiving of this book. And so when I knew that book was going to be set in San Diego, I decided I had to drop in my favorite San Diego bookstore. So I want to talk, I'm going to read a little bit, short passage from the book, but I also just want to talk about how it came to be and the things that influenced it. I conceived of the book during the worst of Southern California's COVID lockdown. And the question I was asking myself every day is, what is my breaking point? I didn't know. And I think like all of us, we were wondering where our breaking point was, how we were going to handle this crisis that was upon us. And I'm sure watching us all around us, other people, their breaking points. Not only was the pandemic raging, but Black Lives Matter. I mean, the world seemed like it was on fire. And a lot of that fed into this book. I created characters and then asked, what's their breaking point? And what can I, events or situations that I can put them in that will test that? The main character is, well, there are two main characters, but one of them is a therapist. And that really came about because I was thinking about my own therapist, upon whom I relied quite a bit during the pandemic. And I was thinking about how hard it must be to carry everyone's pain and grief as well as your own. So that was how I began to think about creating a therapist character. And then when I knew I wanted to do that and I wanted to also start addressing privacy issues, I thought, well, therapists are honor bound to maintain confidentiality and maintain confidences, but who is diametrically opposed to that? Who isn't the most invested in trying to expose secrets? And I thought, well, a reporter. And so that's why the two people at the heart of the book are a therapist and a young and ambitious television reporter that she encounters. I think that one of the things I want to talk about is how my research for this book impacted me. I always do a lot of research. It's one of the really fun parts of being a writer. But I had to do a lot of research into privacy issues. And we should all be scared. I have to tell you that. We should all be afraid because as I discovered, we really have no privacy anymore. CCTV carpets our cities. Ring doorbells are revealing every teenager who's sneaking in late, every package thief. Google and most of the other browsers aggregate and sell your personal information, your marketing information. We've all had the experience where we've just thought of something or mentioned it, and all of a sudden our social feed is filled with advertisements for that very same thing. Or the stories about Alexa overhearing a little girl and ordering $1,000 doll's house, which suddenly arrives at her parents' house. And there are all the ways in which we willingly give away our privacy. We're constantly exchanging information, sharing it, uploading, downloading, planting ourselves on social media, which has a whole other cost, because what we're finding with social media is everything from FOMO, to literal tics in teenagers who are watching too much TikTok. There's real compromising of our privacy in our society that I think we're all way too willing to give away because of convenience, or because it's easy, or because we're not thinking about it. And I will tell you that even a smart refrigerator can be hacked, and then your entire network accessed. Now, I don't like to believe that there are all bad actors in the world, but I'm a thriller writer, so I do. I believe there are a lot of bad actors there. And I think it would be really important. I mean, what I hope out of this book, first of all, is that people read it, they don't guess the ending, they have a fun ride. But I also hope that people think about the issues in it and are maybe a little more cautious about how they expose themselves. The character at the heart of the book, Dr. Lena Landers, is someone who has this very uneasy relationship with privacy, and obviously is honor-bound, professionally bound to keep her private information from her patients. So, as in the book, when that seems to be exposed and her patient's most private information seems to be used to taunt them, that's why she has to jump into action. I'm going to read a short excerpt from the book, which is kind of what gets the story going and which I hope will intrigue you. The setup is that we meet Lena. She's just ending a day of work. She's the last one out of her office, which is a clinic she's formed with a partner called the Better Life Clinic, located right here in San Diego. And I'm going to read a short section that I hope will give you a sense of the tone and pacing of the book. With the door of the clinic locked behind her, Lena glances quickly left and then right. She's annoyed with herself for her unease, but she's felt apprehensive and on edge for days now. She may have reassured Harley that she is completely fine, but in her heart and gut, she knows that something is wrong in her world, even if she can't name what or why. It's just a feeling, an uneasy, creepy sense that some danger is edging ever closer. She tries to shake off her fears, but nonetheless slides her keys between the fingers of her right hand and forms a fist around them, creating an impromptu set of brass knuckles before striding down the hallway to the elevator and punching the call button. The elevator glides open as if it had been waiting for her. Lena confirms the car is empty and hurries inside, using the keys threaded through her fingers to press the closed door button and then jab for level A of the underground garage. She looks down at her tight white knuckles, keys bristling between them. What woman hasn't done this, Lena thinks ruefully. If only she could sort out why exactly it is that she's had this weird sense of dread. She never used to feel unsafe in this office building. Quite the contrary. But everything's changed, hasn't it? The whole world is different now. The elevator door slides open. Scanning the largely empty parking garage, Lena spies her car, a late model Jeep, sitting in its parking spot under a pool of light way at the far end. She moves to the car quickly, eyes darting, heart pounding, slipping in and out of the circles of light cast by sporadically placed overheads, her heels clicking hollowly on concrete. Lena reaches her Jeep, pressing her key fob to beep it open, flings her bag on the passenger seat and slams her door closed, relocks the car with a jab at the button, hits the ignition. As the car purrs to life, Lena grips the steering wheel with both hands, trying to steady her breath. You're being ridiculous, she thinks. Calm the fuck down. She puts the car into gear, but the lilt of her cell phone makes her startle. She digs in her satchel for it, forcing a chuckle at her own jumpiness, but the laughter turns to a frown as she reads the caller ID, Peter Hutchinson. After hesitating for a moment, Lena answers the call. Peter, is everything all right? Nothing's all right. Hutchinson's ragged voice booms through the car's Bluetooth speakers. I'm going to kill her. I swear, I'm going to pull the trigger. Please talk to him. It's Claire, Peter's wife, her voice faint in the background and torn by tears. Dr. Landers, please. He has a gun. Lena gulps in air, desperately trying to maintain her cool. She pushes that ugly word gun away from her thoughts and focuses on her patients. Peter and Claire Hutchinson have been seeing Lena for 8 months, working through the cracks and fissures in their marriage. While Claire had shown emotion in their sessions, Peter maintained a consistent facade of reserved respectability. Lena's never even seen him lose his temper. Where are you, Peter? She asks, struggling to keep her voice steady as she reconciles the man she knows with the ravaged voice of the phone. My house, my own goddamn house, he answers with a laugh that sounds like a sob. The place is crawling with cops, but just let them try to stop me. There's no other way. It's all gone too far. You're wrong, Peter, Lena exclaims. There's always another way. You know I'm on your side, right? How about I come to you and we talk this through? Please, Peter, you called me because you want to talk, right? Lena's breath catches in her throat. Terror strikes with the realization that Claire's life hangs on the success or failure of her words. There's what feels like an infinite pause, an eerie suspension of time and place, as Lena feels the weight of that responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. softly in the background. Lena turns up the volume in her car, but all she can hear are Claire's wretched weeping and Peter's heaving breath. Peter, Lena says softly, I'm already in my car. Just let me get over then. Okay? So we can talk in person. All right, he finally grunts. I'll be there as quickly as I can. And Peter, please, I know you don't really want to hurt Claire. You don't, right? You know that, and I know that. So stay on the line with me while I drive, okay? Hutchinson hangs up, and Lena swears out loud. So that's the end of the excerpt. And what I'd hope to show in this beginning section, of both prior to this and in this section, is how dedicated Lena is, how scared she is in the situation, and that plays out in the scene where she actually does talk him down and talk this man out of killing his wife and gets him to release the gun. He's arrested, and this whole event is captured on camera and by a news reporter who becomes very fascinated with her by the name of Cal. And this is where their relationship begins. She's incredibly leery and incredibly wary, but he breaks down her defenses. And not only does he crack her way into his life, he cracks his way into her heart. And that's something else that I wanted to write about because I feel like one of the most risky things we can do is love. With love comes the inevitability of loss, the potential for heartache, the vulnerability of exposing yourself. And when I was creating these two characters, I wanted to have characters that were set oppositionally to one another. Her bound to protect secrets, him dedicated to exposing secrets. But I wanted to give them other conflict as well. And so she's white and he's black. And race becomes an issue between them. And I've been asked a little bit about this, about why I chose to write a black character. And so I'd like to just address that head on. I write all kinds of characters. They're characters of all races and ethnicities, ages, etc. in all of my books and always have been. In the time that I've been publishing books, the world has changed a little bit. And this is the first time that my publisher asked me to do a sensitivity read for both the black character and for the trans character who figures in the book. But again, my feeling is that as a writer, it is my job to create a rich world. If I just wrote about the world that reflected me, it would be pretty dull. And so I feel my job, besides entertaining you all, is also to really do my research, to be smart about how I create characters. And so for Cal, I researched his upbringing and his ethnicity and his race as much as I did his profession, his education, and every other question that I ask about him. And I want to just be clear, I'm not writing a dispositive black story. I'm not writing even a black story. I am writing a multi-populated story in which I have black, Asian, white, Indian characters of all sorts, gay, straight, trans, etc. And that's because that's the world we live in, and that's the world I want to reflect. And I think for writers, our obligation is really just to be smart and to do that research. I also want to touch on one thing that I hope people will also think about and talk about is how much we're exposed to through live news and constant news feeds. I learned in the course of researching this that for news, television news reporters, there's a person in the control room who is essentially God, right? So that if someone is carrying live something like a potential hostage situation, that person in the control room is charged with deciding when or not to hit the kill button, to say we cannot see on television anymore. And I just think in my lifetime how much has changed in terms of what is acceptable on television and how standards have eroded. And again, I think that there's a lot that is great, that is good to have come out of technology. I think it's great that we can learn almost instantaneously what's happening all over the world. I also think that's terrible because that can lead you to a doom spiral. I think it's wonderful that Zoom has enabled us to connect. I certainly have done a ton of meetings and work over Zoom, and I'm grateful to the people who are joining us tonight virtually or will watch it after it virtually, and that's certainly a great boon. But there's also a real cost to that, and I just would urge everyone to think about it in a way that makes you a little more proactive and a little bit more in charge of your decisions. I also want to talk about character as of place in a book. And it's sort of funny because I've written books that have been set all over the world. My first book, Just Fall, is set in Manhattan. I grew up in New York and then the Caribbean island of St. Lucia. I've written books. The Burial Society is set primarily in Paris and the States. The Empty Bed primarily in Hong Kong. Convince Me, my penultimate book, and Privacy are both Southern California books. And I think that has come about in part, and certainly with respect to privacy, because I was traveling less. And my travel sort of always influenced my writing, because I would be inspired by the people I met, the things I saw. And I'm sure many of you have heard this before, but the two things that are really charged with giving people empathy for others are travel and literature and reading, precisely because you were forced in the commission of those two things, reading books or traveling, to walk in other people's shoes and to really see what their lives are about. And so for me, being able to turn that lens to places I had been and try to incorporate in books was always kind of a thrill. But when I conceived of Privacy, I, like everyone else, I was on lockdown. I was terrified. I was still bleaching my groceries. I'm sure you all remember those days, bleaching your groceries and just living in fear. And the farthest I could think of to dream from my home in Los Angeles was San Diego. San Diego seemed impossibly far. And at that time it was, because normally if I had been writing a book in San Diego, I would have come down here for a week. I would have done other things besides the mysterious Galaxy Bookshop. But I would have eaten at restaurants. I would have gone to parks. I would have attended museums, and I would have imbued the book with all of that texture. And instead, I had to do it all online, which I hope is successful. I hope that people who live in San Diego read the book and feel I did it justice. But I think that, again, it's sort of one of the really fun parts of writing is that deep dive into all of the research. And San Diego, in part, became a very good location for the book in service of Cal's character, because he's a very ambitious reporter, and San Diego is, what they say is they pay you in sunshine until you can make it to LA and get paid in big bucks. So I positioned my character as Cal as someone who is here with his eye on the prize to an anchor job in LA. That's his dream. He's worked up. This is like the second market. And I thought it was important that he be hungry, because I thought that would fuel his quest, even as Lena is saying, please stop, please stop. Don't look. I don't want to expose my patients any further. I knew that would fuel his ambition, would fuel his quest. And so that these people who found enormous trust and love, and I hope you'll also find, some pretty hot sex scenes in here. Pride myself on doing that well. But I think that also I wanted to position them with as much opposition as possible. So many things, because what makes good storytelling? I believe good storytelling, it comes from conflict. I also teach writing, and one of the things that I always say is that I feel like the writer's key job is to create characters for whom a reader feels empathy. That's number one. Then you have to create circumstances or situations that are going to cause the reader to feel anxiety about your characters. Then you have to provide them with a resolution, which gives the reader catharsis. I sometimes call this, in a very reductive way, math for writers. Empathy plus anxiety plus resolution equals catharsis. And that's reductive, but I think it's true. I think that, and that's why I think character development and character research is so important. When I develop my characters, I use a worksheet that I've created over time. It has several hundred questions, I think now, that I ask about my characters, everything from their schooling to their sexual preferences, gender identity, how many times they've moved, what kind of driver they are, how they drink their coffee, what their favorite cocktail is. And I'll tell you that often a lot of these decisions that I make about a character don't make it into the book. But when the character is a juncture point, because I've done all this pre-writing and done all this work and I know these characters so well, they can both do things that are completely expected and also things that surprise me. And that's probably the most delicious part of being a writer, is that glorious moment when no matter how much pre-writing you've done, and I always do a ton, and how much outlining you've done, and I always do that, the characters just take over, and you're thinking you're going in one direction, and in fact, they're just going to take you in another. And that happened to me several times in the course of writing this book. So I also want to talk about why I love to write thrillers and why I started writing thrillers. I'm a voracious reader of all genres, but when I wrote my first book, I was really struggling personally, and I do believe that a lot of good art, all my good art, has come from my struggles. A lot of it comes from rage. That's the first thing. If you go to my website, that's the first thing you'll see, is that it says my inspiration comes from rage, and that's completely true. I walk around enraged about society's injustices and dignities all the time, and usually a book comes out of that. But when I wrote my first one, I was newly remarried. We had blended a family of 4 teenagers, which I would say don't do. And we were really struggling, my husband and I. And I thought this glorious second marriage that I thought seemed like a fairy tale was just going to end badly. And I was really sad. And he and I went away for a weekend, and it was supposed to be, romantic and walks on the beach and sunshine. And the weather didn't even cooperate. It was freezing. We didn't have the right cold clothes. We never went to the beach. We went to the movies to get warm. And we weren't talking about the elephant in the room, which was how the blended marriage was affecting our relationship. And at the very end of the weekend, I was watching some guys throw a football down on the beach from the balcony, and I looked back at my husband, who was lying with one arm flung back over the bed, and for the briefest second I imagined that he had a knife in his stomach. Very brief. But being a writer, I scribbled that scene down of a woman in a hotel room with a man with a knife in his belly. And if any of you read my first book, Just Fall, you will see that is the opening of that book. It's not me. It's not him. It's not Laguna Beach where we were. It's in St. Lucia. In that book, the woman discovers on the night of her wedding that her husband is a contract killer, and she's told she must go to the Caribbean and kill someone if she wants him to live. And, while that is not me and not my story, certainly, and no one died in my life, people have died, but not in this kind of way, no knives. So while that was what I was writing about, I was actually working out all my own very real feelings of fear about having made a mistake, and all my real questions about where would I compromise myself in the name of love? What things would I do that were past what I thought I had been willing to accept in order to make this relationship work? So I was asking those on a very personal level. I was able to take those big emotions I was feeling and blow them up to thriller level. And I think that has always sort of been what I've done. With the Burial Society, the second book I wrote, that character, that protagonist, is my badass avatar. I go to marches, I sign petitions. She relocates abused women, whistleblowers, people who have done right and need help, disappears them, acts like a private witness protection program, and sets them all up in new lives. And that came about my rage about feeling I could not do enough to help the world, that I was powerless, that everything I was doing to try to make the world a better place was not effectual. And so I thought, I'm going to create this character who's going to do that for me. Convince Me, my fourth book, was about pathological liars. And I was so furious about pathological liars and how I feel alternative facts and what lying has done, and the lack of reverence for science and the truth and literature and thinking, what that has done to dumb down America, and how divisive it has made us. That made me so angry that I wrote that book, first draft of that book, in 4.5 months, because I was just so filled with rage. So for me, it's all therapy. And so my husband now jokes that it's a good thing I do write, otherwise he might actually end up with a knife in his belly. And as I said with privacy, I was really wondering, and I actually had what is our breaking point? Because I was asking that of myself. And I will also tell you that I got the most lovely note from a neighbor just yesterday who had read the book and had recently lost her partner. And she got it 100%. She said, this asks one of the most stunning questions we have to deal with in the course of our lives. How much pain and grief can we bear before we break? And I think that I believe that we are resilient. I believe that things we bend so that we don't break. I believe that we can recover. I believe we're all recovering. I do believe the last couple of years have, kicked the crap out of all of us, and that we all need a collective hug and just to be nicer to each other and to really figure out how to come back from this in a way where we're kind to ourselves as well as kind to other people. But also, I just hope that you'll pick up Privacy, take it to the beach, read it, tell your friends about it. And then if you love it, please review it. Leave reviews on Goodreads or Amazon or wherever else, and because it really matters to an author. I also want to shout out all indie bookstores. Please support them. It's the most important thing you can do. And if you go to IndieBound, they will find you a local independent bookstore. It's really important to do that. Books are magic, and we all need them, and we can't afford to let our bookstores go. And the last thing I would say before I open up to questions, I would just urge people, if you like, to go to my website, sign up for my newsletter, which is called Cheerfully Dark Dispatches from the Cheerfully Dark Mind of Mina Sadowsky. I'm in a frenzy of release now because I'm supporting the book, but generally it comes out about once a month. I answer all questions that come to me through the website. You can also find their book club kits for all my books that have recipes, conversation questions, cocktails, recipes that have been specially created for each book. So I hope you'll do that. As I said, I'm a filmmaker. Did I say that? I don't know. I'm also a filmmaker. 3 of my books have been put into development for television. Some people sniffing around Privacy now, so I hope that'll be too. So one of the things that I talk about in my dispatch is the relationships between publishing and Hollywood, and how intellectual property is transferred. So I give that kind of business advice as well as craft advice, and also bring you into my semi-fabulous life of being an author. So that's all I really have to say. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much. Yes, our first online question is, how does the current state of LA inspire your work? And a request, would you write a dystopian thriller set in LA?
Well, the current state of LA, a little like the current state of San Diego, is a little shocking, I think, primarily from the perspective of the homeless situation. I think crime, which we're seeing all over the country. Certainly, we've seen it in our neighborhood, and increase not only in crime, but in the audacity of sort of daylight smash and grabs and that sort of thing. So I think that I'm always influenced by what we're living in, but I'm also happy to say that I was very glad to be done with Privacy. I think the book, for the readers, is 100% entertaining, but it came for me out of writing out of a dark place. And I'll also, just be honest that I had to finish it while my father was dying and then died. So I started writing it from a very dark place, and then was finishing the book, copy editing, having to write acknowledgments, all the final work, all of that, while I was grieving. And so for me, I'm very happy to leave it behind. I don't know that I would ever write a dystopian novel just because I'm more optimistic. And even though my books, I'm a very cheerful person who writes very dark books, but I feel like there's always a glimmer of hope in my books. There's always the sense that things can be set right. There's always someone who is fighting on the side of truth and on the fight of good, because that's what I believe in: compassion, empathy, all of that. I am working on 2 new books right now. One is about love cons, and I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but I did, went a lot down a lot of rabbit holes researching this. But it started because I read an article that said there was $600 million scammed in America from people by love cons, people during the pandemic, people who were so desperate for some kind of interaction that they just were willing to give their money away to people that they had never met. And I was fascinated by that, both by the person who was the con, the psychology of what made you drive to do that, and also the psychology of the people who were taken, because some of them continued to give money even after it was exposed. They still sort of somehow believed. And so that became very interesting to me. So I had done all this research, and I had done an outline, and I sat down one day to write it, and all of a sudden I had 4,000 words that were completely about something else, and may I just say, ghosts. Somehow there are ghosts. So the ghosts are speaking to me. I'm not entirely surprised because, as I said, I suffered a recent family loss. And so I feel like what I'm seeing with the ghosts is I'm going to process something else out of me, which is going to be loss and grief, more loss and grief. But again, I don't think I'd write dystopia because I want to believe that the world is going to be a better place.
So just connected to what you said you're working on two things. One of them is about love cons.
Mm-hmm.
What can you say?
The other one is more of a family story. It has a working title, which I don't like, so I'm not going to share it. But it's sort of a family story, and it's about, one thing that I've learned, I mean, the most successful movie I produced as a producer was The Wedding Planner. And I learned from making that movie with Jennifer Lopez and Matthew McConaughey that people love weddings. And they, and if a wedding isn't the title of a movie, it automatically ups its box office by a certain percent, right? There's just something about the happiness of it, the ritual of it, that draws people. And also, there's always terrible stuff happening behind the scenes, right? So this is a story about a family that gathers for a wedding, and someone is killed. And as a result of that, a generation worth of family secrets are exposed. So I hope you're intrigued. It's very nascent, but it's coming along. It's fun.
Oh, very intriguing. Next question is there a character arc that you thought would go a certain way, but ended up completely different?
Let me think about that. That's a good question. Yes, well, not in the most recent book, not in Privacy, but there is a secondary character in the Burial Society books. The way the character who runs that organization, what she calls the Burial Society, is she basically recruits people that she's helped. Either, you owe me now, and so I'm just going to stash this person on your boat for 5 days, or, she actually trains them and brings them into her organization. And in the first of those books, there's a brother, young man, who's the son and brother of a family that's affected. And he, in the beginning, it sort of doesn't want to believe a lot of what he learns about his family over the course of the book. And at the end, ends up joining Catherine and her group. And that was something that I didn't see coming. I thought that story was going to end. But then I just saw a way for her to connect with him. And he's a young man in the first book who's dealing, with the tragic disappearance of his mother, a younger sister's mental illness, ultimately the murder of his father, coming out as gay. He's got a ton of things on his plate. And I kind of thought, well, he's going to end in this book. But I kind of fell in love with him, I think is what happened. And so now he is a stalwart and figures very prominently in The Empty Bed, the second book in that series. Became even more of a major role than Catherine herself, because I fell in love with him and who he was, and I wanted to give him more page time.
Excellent. All right, next question is, you spoke about character building. What about world building? What's your world building process?
Again, a lot of research. I don't have, I would say it's a little bit more reverse engineered. I don't have the same kind of sheets and sheets that I do to fill out to help build a world because, I haven't built a fantasy world, whereas I think, I really admire people who write fantasy and have to go build the entire world. I don't have to do that. I can steal from existing worlds, from places I've been or places I can research. But I always do believe that a place is a character in the book. And so, and it can be used in so many ways. One of the tricks that I use when I'm writing, and I call upon my background as a filmmaker, and this is not even as a film writer, but as a film producer, is I often think about what would I need if I was producing the scene, right? What would the production department have to bring in? What would the wardrobe be doing? The wardrobe department be doing? What would the lighting look like? Would I need a greensman? What do I need mist in the air, right? Is there rain? And so because I'm thinking of like what I would actually need to make it happen, all the different departments, I think it lets me think more deeply and visually about texture for locations in a way that I know people always say my writing is very visual, and I think that's true because I'm actually thinking visually about the world I'm building. So I do build it, but I wouldn't say at the expense of character. You know, as I said before, to me, creating empathy for characters is primary. Where I really look to build the world, it would be, say, in their apartments. Like, for example, Lena's apartment is custom designed. It's a sign of her success. We know that she has real pride that she was able to buy this condo that's just steps away from the beach, that she had it custom designed to her specifications. To her, this is a sign of achievement. Where Cal is living in temporary corporate housing that his station has put him up at the beginning of the book. And I did that because I wanted him to feel, you know, he's in a rental car, he's not in his own space. I wanted him to feel like a stranger in a strange world, right? So, you know, I gave some details to his apartment, like that the glass is broken at the bottom of the slider mirror that's on his wardrobe door. I gave little details like that to make it a little depressing, right? And then in the course of the book, he moves up. He gets his fancy high-rise apartment in downtown San Diego with the views, and you know, feels really, you know, excited. And that's, again, part of his trajectory. It sort of sets him up for a later disappointment, which I won't reveal.
Nice, excellent. All right, next question. After the last 2 years, after experience the last 2 years, what are some of the best coping mechanisms you have found or learned?
Good question. So, writing for me, because I write to stay sane. I know a lot of writers who could not write during the pandemic, and I felt terrible for them because they were just like, I'm too depressed, I'm too scared, I can't do it. And for me, it's how I deal with all my fear and all my depression. So, writing. I'm a big proponent of the 4-7-8 breath. It's really simple. You inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. This is a breathing pattern that is proven to reset your automatic nervous system. So I do that quite a lot. I meditate daily, sometimes just very briefly, but sometimes quite a long time. And I actually, at the beginning of the year, I do a lot of guided meditation, so I wrote a self-meditation that was really specific to things that I wanted to work on in myself, and I found that really helpful. I found I could write, but I could not read for a really long time during the pandemic, and I have to say that was very, as someone who consumes sometimes 2 books a week, it was really painful for me. But I found that after staring at Zoom all day, I couldn't look at anything. I didn't want to read. I didn't want to watch TV. It's when I actually got into podcasts because I could close my eyes. And that's when I went down the rabbit hole of true crime podcasts, which, you know, once you're down that, you're lost forever. But I think that, you know, an exercise, music is another one. You know, in my day job, I run NYU's Los Angeles Study Away program, and in my day job there, when we're in the office, obviously we have not been a lot, but we are now going back. And when we're there, every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I have a 5-minute dance break. I make everyone who's in, student, faculty, staff, I don't care. We put on a song, we dance for 5 minutes, lifts everyone's spirits, and I feel like music is really a balm. The first concert we got to go to post-pandemic, it was an outdoor event at the Greek Theater. Their lead singer started crying. It was 21 Pilots, and the lead singer started crying mid-show, and everyone was like, is this an act? And we realized, no, he was genuinely crying, and he said, I never thought I would perform for a live audience again. And all, you know, then I was crying, and everyone was crying, right? But I found it so joyous, and I always find music, particularly live music, just really joyous and uplifting. So those are my techniques. Am I sane yet? No. That's all. I have all those things in my arsenal. I'm still, you know, a crazy person, but doing my best.
I must say, I really wish we also had a mandatory dance hour here. Or dance time.
It's only 5 minutes. You can institute it. Just, you know, 4 o'clock, 5 minutes. Just, you know, a little Dua Lipa, or, you know, just something to get you going.
So when it comes to the ending, do you typically like to plan those out, or is it something that you find along the way, along with writing the story?
Well, I think with thrillers, you really got to know your ending, because I think that one of the most successful things you can do as a mystery or thriller writer is hide everything in plain sight. I think that's really crucial. I hate when you read something and you feel manipulated or like you weren't given the clues, right? And so it's a very hard balance, because you don't want people to guess, right? but also you want to give them enough so that when you do reveal your final twist or twists, I always like to have more than one, just because, they don't feel resentful, right? And so when I wrote my first book, I did not have an ending, and I think my editor sent me back 14 times, and she consoled me with the fact that Gone Girl sent back 22 times for that ending. Still don't think it works, but Gone Girl, not mine. Shouldn't do that. Shouldn't show shade another offer. That was wrong. But it's just a personal opinion. But so with that one, I did not know. Since then, I really have. Although, as I said, certain things surprised me. Like with Empty Bed, I thought the character of Jake was going to be gone, and then he demanded to be heard and to stay. It didn't change other fundamental parts about the ending, but that did change. For Privacy, I didn't know everything about how it was going to play out. And as I said, I always outlined and then abandoned the outline and re-outline. But I did know what I wanted the ending to be. More or less. And then my editor had a great suggestion, actually, which I thought, I can't explain without giving away the ending, but freed me up from something that I thought was going to curtail the ending in the way. And she made a suggestion that opened it up. And that's the beauty of working with a good editor. So shout out, Inspire.
Thank you for a good question. All right. Hannah coming out with, do you have a favorite writing ritual?
Yes. Okay, so this is going to sound really very California of me, but I really believe in, before you start to write, clearing your head, doing a little meditation, and opening yourself up to your own unconscious as well as the collective unconscious. I believe, you can't always be in that beautiful zone where, you're just with the muse. A lot of times you sit down to work and it is work. And you maybe get one good sentence and you just have to put in the hours. So my ritual is when I say I'm going to work, I commit to that time, whether it's, 2 hours at the beginning of a day or all day Saturday, whatever it is, I decide I commit to that time. I'm very religious and faithful to myself about it. I feel like the biggest commitment as a writer that you can make to yourself is show up. And then some days your work isn't good and you have to rewrite it all, but all writing is rewriting anyway. But I respect my time. I try to allow myself to open up to the unconscious. That's when the crazy stuff happens. And then dance breaks, because, you need a dance break.
Again, the power of dance breaks.
No, it's all about the dance breaks. It's all about it.
Do you have any favorite tropes that you're able to incorporate into the book? Or, opposite of that, what are tropes that you're not too fond of and wanted to keep out?
Well, I try not to think in terms of using tropes. I mean, useful stereotypes and tropes can be useful because they're a shorthand. But of course, I'm always trying for originality. I think I would say, if anything, what I try to do is take them and play with your expectations about them, right? As opposed to just falling into them. I would rather take a stereotype or a trope and turn it on its head and make it a little different and make people think about it a slightly different way than give into it. Not that I have any favorites.
Do you ever find in your writing that you have basically made yourself anxious or spooked yourself with your writing?
Yes. Actually, there's a watcher character in Privacy who's spying on Lena's patients, and it's written first person. And I had to get into a very weird head to write those sections. I'll be honest about it. I had to get in. I mean, I'm writing a stalker. I'm writing someone who is pretty creepy.
Like method writing. Yeah,
it was a little bit I had to feel that, and I had to really shake it off when I was done with those chapters, because I didn't, in order to really do justice to that character, I had to sit in someone who was not mentally well. And so that spooked me out a little bit. But the rest of it, not so much, because I love writing so much. I just genuinely do. I know a lot of writers hate it and they struggle with it, and I'm not one of them. I genuinely love it, and I feel so grateful that I can do it and get paid for it. That, it's a miracle to me. And I will say, as someone who sold her first book over 50, I feel like I'm like a beacon of hope to a lot of people, even though a lot of people also hate me because I sold my first book. I never had a rejection letter. But what I say about that is, yes, I sold my first book, and I sometimes go to conferences and I'm seated next to someone who had 72 rejections before they sold something, and they just look at me with daggers. But what I also say is I had 20 years prior to that of working in the film business as a producer and a writer, which not only gave me a large skill set creatively, but also gave me access. I didn't really know agents in the literary world, but I knew people who knew people, and access in any creative endeavor is as important as the talent that you have. So yes, I was an overnight success as a published author, but after 20 plus years in working very hard in another industry, related industry, where I did a lot of book adaptations as a writer, produced some as a producer, but really understood a lot about storytelling and also marketing, which is essential, because that's the other thing that I don't think people understand is how much marketing falls to the author, even if you're with a major publisher. For example, for support of this book, I created the book club kit. I wrote articles for places like Crime Reads and Elle and other places to support it. I filmed content with craft tips for Instagram personalities like Leslie Zemeckis, and for Instagram accounts like Novel Suspects. There's so much. I did a live streamed class on adaptations in return for pre-orders that Random House sponsored. There's so much work that you have to do as an author to try to break through and reach an audience, because there's a lot of content out there. There's a lot to watch, there's a lot to read. How do people find out? So there's such an enormous push to get a book launched. It's a very different kind of work than the actual writing of the book. And after I released 2 books in 2020, which I did, one before the pandemic and one during the middle of the pandemic, which were very different experiences. Obviously, I thought, I'm never going to market a book again. But here I am, happily out here marketing another book, because I was thrilled that I was able to write and sell another one.
Excellent. What is your favorite place you've traveled to that you've gotten to incorporate into a book?
Oh, well, Hong Kong probably, and I'll tell you why, because this again comes from the personal. I'm married 10 years. We survived the blending of the teenagers, who are all now thankfully out of the house. But when we were married 5 years, my husband said I planned a trip to San Francisco for us, and we're gonna go up for 10 days. And I thought, wow, that's a long time in San Francisco, but I'm not going to look a gift vacation in the mouth. Thank you so much. So we get in the Uber to go to the airport, and he pulls out my passport, and I say, well, I don't need a passport to go to San Francisco. And he goes, oh, well, we're flying to San Francisco, and then we're flying to Hong Kong and Tokyo. And he had planned this whole surprise trip to Asia, and I had no idea. And the Uber driver is like, hey, buddy, you've ruined it for me and every other husband on the planet, because who's going to top this? And off we went. And so we get to San Francisco, and I call my editor from the airport, and I say, Burial Society was just released, and they wanted me to do a second book in that series. And I was thinking about the idea would be, so I got to San Francisco, and I called my editor, and I said, husband planned surprise anniversary trip for wife to Hong Kong, wife disappears. And she went, go, write it. So then I walked around Hong Kong, looking at places that I could use for this book, which was then forming in my head. So I suppose that's my favorite one, but also, of course, Paris, because, Paris, romantic and mysterious and beautiful city. So those 2, I would say.
Definitely jealous. All right. The last question we have are, of course, what are some recent or upcoming books that you want to give shout-outs to?
Oh, this time I'm going to blank. I'm not going to remember anyone's books. I'm just going to talk about a few authors that I really like, who have been really supportive to me. Wendy Walker, fantastic thriller writer. Liv Constantine, who are Lynn and Val Constantine, the sisters who write under Liv Constantine, also wonderful. Jenny Milchman is another writer who has a new book that I know is coming out soon that I'm really excited about. I think Kate Atkinson is probably one of my favorite and always living writers. I just love everything she's written, from her Jackson, now I'm forgetting his name, but her mysteries to her more literary novels. I just think that she's wonderful. But as I said, I read a little bit of everything. And also Gray Bees, which I'm reading now, which is translated from the Ukrainian, which is a beautiful novel. And I'm supporting the Ukraine. And it's their turn.
Excellent. Well, everyone who is watching right now, thank you so much for being a part of this. Remember, if you want, we have that link below that says buy a signed copy of Privacy. We're going to go ahead and end the stream and have the signing portion, which unfortunately you will not be able to see that part. So thank you so much, Nina, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope everyone has a great night, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye.
Thank you.